apple sausage stuffing. So I'm looking forward to that, for what it's worth. So these two agenda items, obviously we have the HIB report, standard item. One item that's a little bit more unusual, we do once a year a submission of data to the board with respect to a look back at code of conduct. So I wanted to share that with you. Really what we're looking for from year to year is whether or not there's anything that we want to change with respect to our code of conduct to address any matters that appear to be a trend or a problem area. As I looked over the data for the 4 elementary schools, the middle school and the high school, in terms of code of conduct data, I was looking for things that I thought we might need to take action on, and I'm actually pretty pleased to say I think our code of conduct is serving us pretty well. That doesn't mean that we still don't have persistent issues that we're dealing with, such as vaping, although I will say I was pleased to talk to Mrs. Hudak about how the 18-19 year went with respect to vaping, and it was much less for her in terms of identified issues that she had to deal with at the middle school. I'm not saying it was non-existent, but it was much less than it had been the prior year. So I think we made some progress on that front. And I did not see anything that jumped out at me at the high school either with respect to things like drug testing or confirmed positives for suspicion-based use. If anything, the numbers were down a little bit. Maybe because we have a few less students, but the numbers were down a little bit in that area as well. The one thing that we have been talking about with respect to violations of the code of conduct or violations of other specific policies that the board has that sometimes relates to consequences for students has to do with suspension. And the conversations that I've been having with the school administrators, we've also talked a little bit about in policy committee, is what alternatives can we try to use in cases where an infraction warrants suspension typically or traditionally. Things that have often been normally handled with suspension, can we consider other alternatives that might fall into the category of community service, for example, as one option. So I've kind of challenged the administrative team to think about that a little bit in terms of can we do some things that will keep students in class, depending on the nature of the infraction. Obviously, in some cases, there's really a non-negotiable situation where a student needs to be taken out of school. But in other situations, if we feel as though perhaps a suspension that's going to put a student at their home, perhaps home alone for the day or for multiple days, might actually invite more difficulties rather than try to improve the situation in some way. So we're also talking about in-school suspension as an alternative as well. So we're kind of looking at those two things, more of a consequence menu, if you will, in particular at the high school level. But as far as the data is concerned, relative to do we see a changing trend for the worse, I would say definitely not. If anything, we see some positives. As I said, with the efforts to communicate about vaping, I think it's helping, at least for what we see at school. And then the second piece is, just so you know what you're voting on here, we have to submit this annually. In addition to the annual report on code of conduct, which always looks back at the prior school year, in this case 2018-19, we also have to report twice a year on our student safety data system metrics. And in that system, we report to you our metrics on things like HIB investigations, confirmed HIBs, all of the things that used to be the violence, vandalism, and substance abuse. Are now rolled up into the HIB reporting as well as the violence, vandalism, and substance abuse. So Mr. Seid shared those numbers with you as well. Twice a year, meaning once for the spring and once for the fall semesters. Essentially, we really don't have any activity in the summer. So being this is the fall, Mr. Syed gave you the data with respect to last spring. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Thank you, Mr. Markarian. The only number really that is up, I mean, most of the trends are down. The only number that I know board members might have noticed is the violence number at Ridge is 8, which is high if you look at the past years. And I can share, typically the way the state defines violence is any conflict between students. So, you know, one of the things that I talked to the APs about is why is that number higher? And the word back was that students are more comfortable reporting when they get in fights to administration. But I will tell you that this is the combined reporting period 1 and reporting period 2. So we were actually 7 reports of violence in reporting period 1 and only 1 in reporting period 2. So, you know, not that that's a trend, but it certainly went down in the second half of the year. So I don't know whether that's now students not reporting it or that there just weren't as many incidents of violence. But that, again, the number, or the word violence, I think, can instill fear. That can be any kind of conflict between students. Simply pushing another student could be termed violence by the state. So I don't want folks to think that we're talking about violence here. This is conflict between students that's typically pushing, shoving, not a full-fledged fight. Although there were 2 that would fall into that category out of those 8 that involved punches being thrown. But typically speaking, we're not talking about violent acts. And then the rest of the trends, you'll notice vandalism is actually down. That was an issue at Ridge in 17-18. We only had 1 incident of violence, so that was something that Ridge administration has been trying to patrol. And I think also that's due in large part because we have more patrols being done by some of our campus monitor and our SLEO3 as well. So I know that there's a presence in the hallways a lot more. So hopefully that attributes to less reports of violence and also vandalism taking place in the hallways at Ridge. But nothing else that jumps off the page to me.
Yeah, I think that's potentially mitigated as well by the improved camera system. That word travels fast when they know they're being recorded. Any questions before we vote? Mr. Byrne?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to qualify it. I did not attend the November 18th meeting.
We're still on the 2 items under superintendent's report to vote on them first.
Yes.
Okay.
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. Okay, we're up to public comment on agenda items. So if you have a comment or question on anything on the agenda or the presentations, now would be the time. When you come up, could you tell us your name and address? And then after you speak, you can sign in on the clipboard that's laying there on the stage. Thank you. Alexandra Schmidt, 67 Bernard Drive. Thank you to the board for bringing the demographer in tonight and to Dr. Britt for an excellent presentation. Just had a couple of questions. One is with some of those housing developments, they haven't started building yet. So how were those potential additional student numbers actually reflected in the forecast for the next 5 years? So were they already included, or is this an uptick that you can see, maybe expect to see after those 5 years in the longer term, given that it might take another couple of years before they even build? Then I also had a question around the yield per unit. Those numbers always seem really low to me, and I know that they're based on averages. But one thing I'm wondering is, does the current average in our neighborhood in terms of the number of bedrooms reflect what's being built there? So if we have an average for 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and so forth, that will be different. So if the current makeup is maybe predominantly 1 or 2 bedrooms, and now there's 3-bedroom units being built, the averages won't necessarily apply. And the other one, and Dr. Cribb alluded to that, is the yield over time by length of ownership. So if you have an established neighborhood with a mixture of people, some who've just moved in, some who've been living there longer, maybe empty nesters who've decided to stay, that average is different to really new housing development. And I think we saw that on one of the heat maps with the births, if I saw that correctly. That red and yellow area, that was Society Hill, Spring Ridge, some of the newer developments. So I'm wondering whether for those yields, just to estimate the peaks correctly. The averages might make sense over time, but to have that peak estimated correctly, whether we need to look at what happened when the hills were first built, what happened when Spring Ridge were first built, because we're not looking at average numbers, we're looking at almost like the maximum possible number of students that we can expect in a given year. And maybe that might not, they might not come into our doors in the next 5 years, maybe this is longer term and further out. But I always, again, this is just a gut feeling, it always seems kind of low to me. Thank you.
Okay, you can jump in after the questions so we don't get confused with all the different questions we could get.
Okay, I'm trying to remember them all, so I might go from more recent to past. Actually, I might go from oldest to newest. So with the developments, all developments that you would question regarding this in the demographic study are assumed to occur within the next 5 years within this enrollment projection time frame. Whether or not they actually do, that's another story, but I have definitely assumed that they're going to occur, most of them occurring within the next 2 to 3 or 4 years.
So all the kids are in.
All the kids are in there, so all those potential developments are a possibility, which of course, with Mountain View not being approved, could be, if it doesn't happen, I could even be overestimating. So, because we had the quarry, we looked at the quarry in the last demographic study, and look what happened. That didn't happen. So that's number one. Number two, with the different types of bedroom distribution, you're absolutely correct. If you look in the appendix in this particular report, for the townhouses, there's a litany of a range for the yields. However, the problem is a 2-bedroom unit, for instance, is not always constant, say around 0.3 or 0.4. They all jump all over the place from 0.1 kid per unit to 0.7 kids per unit. So it's very difficult to say, if you just focus on 1 or 2 different developments within that list, which one is that you're going to reflect going forward. The average of 0.3, again, I'll reiterate what I said before. If I'm wrong and it's 0.6, we're talking about townhouses, only 40 of them here. We'd only be off by about 12 students. The apartments, I gave quite a high yield for that at 0.6. I'd be very, very surprised if the yields were higher than that, because that's what you're getting out of Crown Court right now. And you had one other question. I'm trying to remember what it was, about length of ownership, right? Yep. So you're absolutely correct. If I was to take the average yield of detached single-family homes, and this distribution, if you can picture it, as it goes down over time, the yields would decrease with length of ownership. I did not take the average of that distribution, because then I would completely underestimate how many children are coming out in the future. So what I did, I took the average between 0 years of ownership up to the peak, which I think was at 9 or 10 years of ownership, and took the average up to that point. So I'm only looking at the real big years where you're getting yields. So you're getting a fair share of number of children out of those single-family homes. It's not like 0.7 if I took the average straight across. Does that answer your question?
Okay, is there anyone else for public comment? On agenda items, I mean. You can speak later on any items. No other questions for Dr. Gripp? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gripp.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Okay, good night. Okay, so I'll close public comment at this point. Now we're up to approval of minutes. There's one item. Would someone like to make a motion for that? Jen Korn and Tim seconded. Any questions about these minutes? The one is from the Connect meeting where we had a quorum of board members. Okay. Do we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne,
Yes on the first two, I abstain. The third one,
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Stephen's mic.
You were there. You were at the BT Connect.
Yeah.
Right, the AT.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes on all, sorry.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes, for the first two, I wasn't there for the third, the 18th meeting.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond? Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. We're up to the Finance Committee. There are 20 items. Would someone like to make a motion for them? Oh, Linda and Jen White, seconded. Tim, do you want to do the report first and then we'll vote?
Yeah, sure. Finance met on November 20th. The first item on the agenda was a presentation from Scott Cleland from Wiz & Company, the auditing firm retained by the district. He came in to review the draft comprehensive annual financial report for the 18-19 school year. December 5th, 2019 is the deadline for submission to the state. Mr. Cleland explained that the audit reflects a clean, unmodified opinion without any question. The second item, Mr. McLaughlin reviewed the projection for health benefit costs that was provided by Joe Colombo from Arthur Gallagher at the last finance meeting. We went over some of the numbers that were included in some of the projections by Arthur Gallagher and some of the revised numbers that Mr. McLaughlin had based on updated claims information for 2019, expected Chapter 78 contributions and COBRA payments that the district intends to receive. And the third item, Mr. McLaughlin explained about a decrease that we are seeing in special education tuition. In the 17-18 school year, the district accepted approximately 22 to 24 special education students from out of district, which generated payments to the district of approximately $1.2 million. In 18-19, the number of special education students from out of district was reduced due to the increased need of our in-district students, and the district took in only approximately $916,000 from those out-of-district special education students. This year, we budgeted approximately $916,000 for payments associated with out-of-district special education students. However, given the increase in needs of our in-district students, primarily in the ABA program, there was a reduction in space available for out-of-district students. Now we only have 12. Consequently, we currently anticipate for that the 19-20 school year we will receive only approximately $250,000 less than budgeted. For 19-20, we expect that the district will receive approximately $650,000 for these students, and the shortfalls in the current year could be covered as long as other special education costs do not exceed the amount of additional extraordinary aid received in August 2019 for the year ended June 30th, 2019. There was an update provided on the Oak Street Playground project. The Oak Street Playground project is complete and open for business. Thank you again to the Oak Street PTO for the donation and for the construction of it. The next item up for discussion was the Ridge High School addition. There were 3 issues related to the addition, the open bid that was requested for the projected addition, the demographer report that we just heard, and then food service options to complete a unit lunch without the new planned kitchen. So for the open bid, the bid was for the planned addition, which was the new kitchen and 4 classroom spaces above the, attached to the 700 wing. The bid was opened on November 14th. We had 14 bids. The bid requests were structured for a base bid and an alternate bid on allowance for the generator system to back up the pack in the new kitchen. Based on the competitive bidding that we saw, it came in under the estimated amount that the district had estimated at $7 million, with the total projected costs coming in around $5.2 million. The bid must be awarded within 60 days unless we ask the lowest firms that submitted bids for an extension of time. On the demographer report, as we saw tonight, Mr. Carrion requested that Dr. Brick update his report to factor in updated enrollment numbers and the anticipated housing developments in the district. We saw all of that number, so I'm not going to go through that. The food service options without the new kitchen was the last item under this issue. Given the projected decline in enrollment, the committee discussed whether or not it made sense to move forward with the addition of 4 classrooms at Ridge in addition to the new plant kitchen. The committee also discussed revisiting the idea of expanding the current food prep and service space, including the use of food service kiosks deployed throughout the building and/or bringing in prepared food to run a unit lunch instead of building an entire new kitchen with the addition. November 21st, Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Markarian met with the kitchen designer and the district architects at Spiesel to review options for expanding the current kitchen with the object of fulfilling a unit lunch. Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Markarian also explained that they're planning trips to Chatham and Watchung Hills to observe their kitchen spaces, food offerings, and logistics for their unit lunches. At the December 4th Finance Committee, Mr. McLaughlin and Mr. Markarian will present a side-by-side comparison of the projected costs and operating costs of the proposed new addition versus expanding the current cafeteria cooking area. In the last item, there was a discussion of an update to the food service director provided by Aramark in the district, which the new candidate has been hired and has started already. As far as the agenda items, 1 through 3 are standing items. Number 4 is a field trip by the Whams Jazz Band. Number 5 is a donation by the Mount Prospect PTO for playground enhancements. So thank you to the Mount Prospect PTO. Number 6 is acceptance of a donation for special services from the Bernards PEC. Thank you to the PEC for that. Number 7 is the approval of disposal of computer network equipment. Number 8 is approval of submission of a grant application related to vaping. 9 through 16 are special education services. 17 and 18 are settlements related to special education students. 19 is acceptance of an out-of-district student. And 20 is approval of the annual audit based on the draft financials and recommendation from Wesson Company, the audit firm. Any questions?
I have a question. I just wanted to extend a thank you to Mr. Byrne, who was kind enough to allow me to attend in his place because of the carryover implications into next year of the discussion at the Finance Committee. So thank you, Mike.
I want to make a comment too. Right after the meeting, Karen called me and explained what I had missed, so thank you.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Stadman?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. We're up to personnel. We have 15 items. Would someone like to make a motion? Tim and Linda. Personnel Committee met on November 15th to discuss personnel matters, most of which I can't report out on. But I did want to say that one of the things that came up at the meeting was several board members had questions about the types of professional development in the district. And so I told Mr. Syatt that there have been a number of questions from the public and from board members. And so Mr. Syatt said that there's going to be a presentation, was it February? Yeah, I don't remember the date, but at a board meeting that will cover all different types of professional development, including the coaching program. So we look forward to that because we haven't heard about that for a while on the board. And we did talk a little bit at personnel about the demographer's report and class sizes, sections, and how the demographic data might affect that. And we also talked a little bit, Tim already reported about the discussion at Finance about the cafeteria at Ridge, but we talked a little bit about the fact that we need to have numbers for staffing, whatever kitchen, you know what I mean, and custodial for cleaning up at lunch and stuff. So we are going to get more details about that too. I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, we are up to the policy committee. Oh, we have to vote. We didn't do the roll call. Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Byrne?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Stadman?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Corn?
Yes.
Mrs. Baldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes,
Madam President?
thank you. Okay, now we're up to the policy committee. There are how many items? 5 items. Would someone like to make a motion? Mr. Salmon and Mrs. White. I think we had to have a discussion about the calendars first. And do you have a
Do you want me to
report
do the
first?
minutes?
Yeah, do the minutes first, and then we can talk
The
about
minutes are, when we talk about the calendars
Okay,
already.
just go ahead.
We'll just, all right, so, I'll skip the calendar discussion. All right? So we're talking about the suspension policy, someone Karen was talking about before. It's policy 5610. And in light of the consequences for the first-time offenders of confirmed substance abuse questions. Substance abuse questions came up about whether this suspension is the best course of action for these particular students, because especially when it comes to the kids caught vaping. So in cases where suspension is the consequence, should the administration have the flexibility to choose another option as a consequence, like example community service or in-school suspension, which is better than out of school because they're at least supervised, especially with kids with drug offenses who would be more, on their own maybe. So consideration include the idea of immediate consequences as opposed to waiting to serve community service, because having it immediate probably would be, it's more impactful maybe. Also, unlike the suspension, community service would not go on the student's permanent record. That's another consideration for the students. The suspension probably would be changed to add flexibility and leave it to the administrator's discretion to replace a suspension with an appropriate consequence where appropriate and allowable. So leave a lot of discretion to the administrators. That was just a discussion. That's not the attendance, which is R5200. It's a state law. So I'm transitioning to Genesis, which is our new student information system. It became apparent that there needed to be a clarification regarding absences. This is confusing, so bear with me on this one. So there are currently 2 buckets when it comes to absences. There's excused and there's truant, which are unexcused. Okay. The confusion comes with the concept of a chargeable absence for credit, which essentially states that if you're not in your seat, you're absent for purposes of credit, and so you lose credit even though your absence is excused. So if you're not sitting in your seat learning, you are missing the credit. Excused and unexcused absences are both counted towards lost seat time. So, I don't have an example. I'll just keep going. I don't want to give a wrong example.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the crux of the issue for us is looking at the student information system, because we just switched to Genesis, and trying to see if there's a better way of using the system to categorize and report and classify the absences. So if we can make that happen, I'll send a letter to all families and explain how it's going to go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Because that would be easier than me trying to explain it. And everyone will be writing me letters about excuse me. Yeah, so this is a reporting issue in Genesis. So, all right. And then for the first reading, we have the policy 8210, it's a school calendar. And we'll do the second reading. We have the policy 2430, which is the co-curricular activities that we talked about last time. And that was will permit students who reside in the district and who are not enrolled in a public school to participate in non-competitive co-curricular activities. That's for second reading. And first reading, we had to discuss the calendar, which I think last time there's 3 outstanding calendars. There's the one for next year, which is 2021. And if we start the day, it starts Tuesday the 1st, start in service for the teachers. There will be the 1st and the 2nd, Tuesday and Wednesday in September. And then the students report the Thursday the 3rd, so that would be before Labor Day. And then at the end of the year, the graduation would actually be on the Friday. Friday the 18th would be graduation, high school graduation, instead of it being the next Monday if we didn't start that one day And then we still have our 3 makeup days, our snow makeup days, 2 being for the February break, the first 2. The first one being the 17th, the second one being Tuesday the 16th, and then the third one would be Tuesday after Memorial Day. So that was the one consideration for the calendar. Nothing crazy. Only the biggest change would be the kids coming in the before Labor Day. What? Yes, we off Friday. Still have a long weekend. They would just be coming in on the Thursday. Thursday the 3rd, off Friday, off Monday. Yep, because it's Labor Day. The 2021-22 school calendar, since it was already, let's see, nothing had to change with this one, essentially, right? It's the first, Wednesday the 1st of September, that's the in-service days. We're closed on Labor Day, and the students report the Tuesday after Labor Day. And then it just way it worked out, the graduation's on Friday the 17th of that year. And we still have our 3 makeup days, snow makeup days. And then the 2022-23 school calendar. We didn't make any changes to this because the 1st is a Thursday, so we couldn't really move any days before that. So we still have our 3 days, and then the graduation would be on a Monday, but there's no really easy way to change that without losing a snow day, and that would be, I don't think that would be good. In all these cases, if we have more than 3 snow days, it gets tacked on after graduation. So again, that would mean that the kids would have to come to get their diplomas after they graduated. That's just a FYI. But those are the 3 calendars that we're supposed to vote on. And then the policy, I think the policy was updated to include, it's 180 school days are scheduled for the pupils and the staff, the same 180 days of students plus additional days consistent with the negotiated agreements to the board. That's about right. Oh yeah, in years where Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur both fall on a weekday, school will be closed on Yom Kippur and open on Rosh Hashanah. In years where only one holiday falls on a weekday and one on the weekend, school will be closed on the holiday that falls on that weekday. And then schools will be closed for students on Diwali where it falls on a weekday. And
then I explained.
I just, snow day.
The snow day makeup, yeah.
And then, and the April recess period would not be used for making up school closures. So that's what we're doing.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
When we discussed this for the first calendar, for the
Yes.
2021,
That would be,
one of the things that was unknown was if you
Right.
moved it, what happens with project graduation?
so we're all good?
So, okay,
That's good, thank you for asking.
Yeah, they're holding the 18th for us. I have to tell them as soon as we start.
Oh, that's good. So that's, any other questions?
So we can have a roll call?
Mr. Byrne?
Yes?
Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Salmon?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McKeon?
Yes.
Madam President.
Thank you. We're up to curriculum.
The curriculum committee meets Friday the 6th of December.
Advocacy,
Seems like it was a while ago, but November 4th, advocacy met with the Ridge School Student Council. This was our first time meeting with them this school year. We began by asking the freshman student council members for feedback on freshman orientation in August, as the format was changed to be a more meaningful experience than in past years. Overall, the feedback was quite positive. Students felt it was extremely helpful to have been able to walk their own schedules, but added a tour of spaces of that all students may frequent, such as the cafeteria, guidance office, nurse's office, main office, and gymnasiums would be beneficial too. The morning was split into different sessions, ending with lunch, Students suggested making time between sessions shorter and eliminating the one on using technology and Google Classroom, as they're familiar with both from middle school. They suggested offering a session for new students to the district who may not be familiar with the technology of Google Classroom. Freshmen shared that they, which is now finished, but they enjoyed Project Adventure and working with the peer leaders who were also a part of freshman orientation. As it was with last year, food was a topic of interest. The students are pleased that there has been some improvements in the cafeteria offerings since the start of the school year. The issue of vending machine availability remains a concern. Mr. Markarian explained the use of vending machines as part of the Aramark contract, and as a new food service contract is sought for the 2020-21 school year, this will be explored. A snack cart near the gym for after school has been offered a few times, and Mr. Markarian will be looking into seeing if it's possible for this to be available frequently for students participating in after-school activities. We asked all students for feedback on the rotating drop schedule and possible change of school times. We clarified that the school day will not be shortened, so if the day begins later, it will also end later. Students offered a later start time might increase student participation in clubs, as many meet before school, and by moving start times, then morning clubs could begin later. Students were very receptive and positive about potentially having fewer classes each day, more time in classes to ask questions, less time rushing through the halls, and seeing friends at a unit lunch. They asked how band, choir, and labs would fit into the new schedule, and Mr. Markarian explained a variety of options for all were being thoroughly looked into, and no final decision has been made. Questions were also asked about Google accounts and about the possibility of accessing and sharing documents from different accounts. For security purposes of computers and files, this is not possible, but Mr. Krause is exploring making passes digital for the media center during study hall to make the process of getting passes as efficient as possible, with the goal remaining to know all students' whereabouts in Ridge. Overall, it was a very productive meeting, and we will be meeting with other student governments throughout the year. Then we met with the PTO presidents. The first topic was about the election, which was now a few weeks past. Then we discussed PTO meeting dates. We reviewed upcoming meetings and asked any newly scheduled events please be shared so they can be added to the list of events on the Board of Ed website. President shared that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get parent volunteers at the schools and getting parents to attend their presentations and meetings. It tends to be the same few parents offering up their time, and their fear is of burning out those parents from the demands being thrust upon them. We tried brainstorming ways to increase participation, and the Board of Ed sympathizes with the PTO presidents as this is something we struggle with as well. Next, we discussed start times. All issues related to changing school start times was discussed, such as the availability of buses and the busing tier, potential for traffic issues or improvements, after-school sports and team games, and the impact on students, parents, and teachers. We asked that the PTO presidents go back to their own communities to share this information and make clear that a change will impact all schools. For parents with elementary students, they may think this does not pertain to them and only involves the high school or middle school students. However, any change would impact all school levels. Bernards Connect will be holding a discussion on this very topic December 2nd at 7 p.m. in the cafeteria at Ridge, and we hope many parents will come out and give feedback. We want to fully research and discuss varying start time options, as are many schools in the state. Who's moved here? Okay, that's Pat.
Not your fault, we just changed it.
Okay, thank you.
It's same time and location, but a different part.
We're expecting a lot of people.
Not Ridge Cafeteria.
The Ridge Pack.
Same time, same date.
Much work still needs to be done in order to come up with the plan that's best for the majority, but we would certainly like to give significant improvement to the quality of life to high schoolers. Next was the New Jersey workshop that a number of Board of Ed members attended, this conference in Atlantic City the week of January 21st. We all attended a variety of workshops in addition to hearing updates from various state legislators. The first BT Connect Council meeting met October 15th, which encompassed an overview of the work that's being undertaken this year. It was attended by students, administrators from each building, parent representatives, and Board of Ed members. The next council meets on December 3rd. And that's just the small group that's not open to the public. Mr. Markarian gave a superintendent report, and he stated that there had been an uptake to yearly testing that involves adding geometry for 11th graders. This is quite similar to how testing was years ago with an 11th grade exit test, the HESPA. However, he's hesitant to say much more at this time, as there's currently is still a window of time before the final vote, and experience shows that they're constantly revising the graduation requirements. But as soon as he is updated or there is an update, he will inform us of any new information. And on Monday, so just to clarify, Monday, December 2nd, is the next open Bernard's Connect meeting. And Tuesday is the Bernard's Connect Council meeting that's just for the smaller group. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, well now we're up to SEL. SEL met on October 31st. Mrs. White did a very good job of summarizing a lot of the same things that we talked about too. So I can skip the freshman orientation as we got up very similar information from that. We did talk about character education at Bridge, which they're going to be working on a character ed program called Character Strong. On October 28th, Mr. Krause, along with 7 teachers from various departments, a supervisor and assistant principal, attended an all-day training in Burlington, Massachusetts. We spent a lot of time on SERVE, the SERVE principle, which stands for Start Intentionally, Engage Relationally, Respond with Empathy, Values Practiced Consistently, and Exit Intentionally. Mr. Krause talked about how they participated in team building exercises. And just as an example, gave out, for Start Intentionally, it's as simple as asking teachers to be at their door, greeting students eye to eye, shaking hands, welcoming them into the classroom, and creating a relationship with the students so they know that the teachers care. I love how like a little example that they gave us. There were some questions about whether a piece of this program could translate over to coaching and coaches. So there may be an opportunity to bring coaches into training and or making them aware of the philosophy of the new program. So we're hoping that there's some potential there. The hope is that this program will put us in a position to build our own Bridge core values, that it becomes the culture of the district and the schools specifically, starting with students to get them to develop expectations of behavior and a level of respect for themselves, from themselves, peers, and adults they interact with. Eventually it will become second nature to them. We talked about the K-12 ASCA National Model Alignment, and Ridge High School has become a school, it's called a grief-sensitive school, which is a new distinction for Ridge High School. That's through New York Life. They brought in somebody to train a bunch of the SACs and counselors, and they, I think, out of 5,000, I just found a typo. I think it says 500 in here, but I think it's a $5,000 grant for participating in that to use to help students deal with grief, which is great. The elementary counseling curriculum writing over the summer took place, and Ms. Smith gave us a document called a crosswalk document, and crosswalk meaning it's just really a visual and to show how all of the different elements of the counseling department come together through ASCA, CASEL, mindsets and behavior, and counseling standards and objectives. So it was a good visual. to show how the counselors are meeting all the standards at every level. The middle school counselors, at the beginning of the year, found a need to have a place for some students to go that weren't exactly liking the environment in the cafeteria. So to address those needs, the counselors, to open their door and let the students come in and they do mindfulness practicing, and the students can work on it. There's fidget toys, activities, puzzles, and the counselors lead them in mindfulness activities, and the students eat their lunch there, and they seem to be loving it. We talked a little bit about the November 6th in-service day. The K-5 staff was going to be participating in the wellness day that the 6-12 group had done earlier in the year. So that was really exciting for them to be able to participate in that. And then the 6-12 staff was going through a 504 and INRS training sessions during that same time. We talked also about the alternative start times. You already covered many of the topics that we talked about. Zooming through 6 pages of notes. And we talked about the coach's handbook that a little bit, and we got a little bit of a progress update on that, and it's still in progress, so we really haven't seen the draft of that. It's to come. And I will be talking, look at the I did tell you I will go through and talk about the last week's meeting, the next board meeting. So to write those minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. We're up to liaison committee reports. I don't think we have any. Next week, okay. Okay, go ahead. Okay.
So I went to they said, "Were you really vaping?" It was put on by the Municipal Alliance at the town hall. I don't know, Jen went, Mrs. White went, we went for there's about 14 people there, I think, for that. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad, and everyone was very interested who was there, asking questions, and the presentation they put on was very informative regarding, what it is, the statistics, also showing, how you almost can't keep up with what kids vape out of. There was stuff there, I thought I knew a lot about vaping, just like stuff like pens, like looks like car keys, look like all kinds of stuff that can be hidden, and just like how, the presentation was great. We didn't know if we were able to share this with, I don't know if they posted it, they videotaped it, it's going to be on YouTube, I think.
We had asked Caitlin, and she said she was going to reach out to you. We had said it's always a shame. I feel like she does such a good job putting her presentations together, and they're so, not user-friendly, but they're so very appropriate. They're at the kids' level, that they could really get a lot out of it. And so she was going to reach out to you, because we said how all of our presentations are always posted on as a link, and she was going to, it was recorded, so she was going to reach out and see if it's possible to include that.
Yeah, show you how it affects the adolescent brain, things like, you might not think about, because I think the kids are still under the impression that it's no big deal. So I thought it was really informative, and people had a lot of questions. It's good for people to know. So,
We're up to public comment on non-agenda items. If you have a comment or question, you can sign in afterwards on the clipboard.
Few things. Can we, when we're doing the budget next time, talk about a new PA system at Ridge? Current one, nobody can hear anything they're saying. I was in 3 different meetings for different things at that high school, and the PA system came up every time. So again, if we're talking about communication and we want kids to attend things, but we're reporting out on it and they can't hear it, then maybe that's a consideration. I don't know what it would cost, but can you guys consider that when you're doing your next budget? Okay, also, I know Karen Richmond just mentioned something about coaches. I appreciate that maybe you'll do the character strong maybe with them, and you also mentioned the handbook. That's wonderful. Thank you for the progress on that. Can we consider also a BT strand? Many people in some of the meetings I was in between PTO, PAC, whatever, were saying that at the strategic planning meetings that we had, a lot of topic that came up was sports in this district, coaching, and stuff like that. It was a very important issue. I know it goes hand in hand with option 2. So they were kind of surprised to see that that wasn't a strand. Now, it may be within another strand. Maybe that needs to be explained, that if we want to talk about that topic, you know, what strand would it be under if it's not its own strand? Option 2, this I wanted to ask at the last meeting for BT Connect, but it kind of got wrapped up. It was 9:40 and I don't want to keep everybody long. But in the summer, there was a section that Mr. Kraus did on the difficulties scheduling option 2. And my light bulb went on, maybe not for a good reason, but it did go on. So my question on the option 2 is, the other elephant in the room when we talk about the master schedule, they were talking about a lot of things people think of, but option 2 was not mentioned, but yet in the summer it was talked about how hard it was to schedule. So I'm just wondering, is that kind of a setup or a segue into when we do the master schedule, that option 2 is too hard to schedule? Are we looking to phase it out? Maybe my concerns are correct, but if you can either ease them or let me know if that's in discussion or where option 2 plays a role in the new master schedule, that would be really helpful. And then the later start time, I know the community's been asking for that for a while, and now that we're actually going in that direction, you know, I understand you're having a meeting, and that's wonderful. I really didn't think there were any negatives to it, but now that you realize the logistics of it between busing and everything else, it's always nice when you get the facts, and then you can realize, oh, well, that's why it wasn't so easy, even though everybody thought it was low-hanging fruit. The only thing, unfortunately, I ended up at the last BT Connect meeting next to a vocation VOTEC mom. And it shed a lot of light on, I've known this one for a long time, but I didn't realize her daughter was in the VOTEC program. And she was concerned about the master schedule going through all your things, and I've been at all the meetings, so I kind of quelled a lot of her concerns, saying, no, they said VOTEC is fine, you know, you'll hear it, they've got, you know, videotapes from the summer meetings, it's explained it out in great detail, they took the time to do those presentations, were wonderful. So I got to understanding that, and everything went well. She looked at the sample schedule you had up there, and she was like, oh wow, no, it will work, I can see how this is going to go, up until the later start time is mentioned. Because right now her daughter takes some online courses for AP French and maybe English to fit it all in because they leave at 11 whatever for the VOTEC. So if you can help me maybe understand, maybe you'll do that at the BT Connect, but I guess that would be my only concern with all the other logistics you have, to maybe how is that going to affect VOTEC? Because as you well know, I don't come here for out my window. I come here for the whole community. I know you guys always address everything, so I was kind of saying we'll get to that in the master schedule. But if you can consider that when you're talking about the later start time, because right now that's the only concern I can see that somebody has that could really negatively impact the students in district.
About a minute ago.
Okay, good, because I was almost done, but I did want to say in the guides of Thanksgiving, I want to be thankful. I've been thankful to some teachers that have impacted my son's life, and there are many. I make sure to acknowledge them for that. I do agree if you're going to complain, you should compliment. And so I'd like to thank each and every one of you. I know you put a lot of time and effort into what you do. I recognize it. I know I'm a tough cookie, but I know that you guys mean well, and there's been a lot of progress in the district. I want to acknowledge that, but also I know you all individually on different levels, and I know that each and every one of you is here because you care and for good reason. And like Linda, I think of you all the time with Municipal Alliance. You don't have a kid in district, Michael Byrne, and the time that you've spent in district, and each and every one of you, to be honest. I wanted to recognize that and leave you with a thank you for Thanksgiving. Enjoy it with your families. Thank you.
Alexandra Schwartz, I'm still at 67 Bernard Drive, unless my husband's moved while I was here. I got the impression earlier that you're still looking at alternatives to the kitchen expansion. I hope I didn't misunderstand that. I think this is great. Now, I understand that we don't have those 5 different lunch periods because someone thought this was a brilliant idea. It was kind of out of necessity, and the school has grown in the 11 years that we've lived here, that there haven't been any major projects at the high school, so this is clearly an older building, and sometimes you have to spend money, but I also think if we can avoid it or reduce it, I'm sure there's other great things that we can find where we can spend that money on. So that's where my thinking comes from. So I like it that you seem to be looking at maybe we can expand the kitchen space into the current cafeteria and use that more. Or I've heard mention of kiosks and other things. Maybe we could even get a food service provider who could allow online ordering, so the students could place an order for a sandwich first thing in the morning. Then they don't even have to go to the cafeteria. They can pick it up at the kiosk in the gym where the flexible seating is. So you avoid, they save time, you avoid all the foot traffic into the cafeteria, and also the kitchen can plan a little bit better. You might not need that peak capacity of where everybody goes in and buys the lunch at the same time. So my question actually was, what are the numbers at the moment that we're working with? I know not every student buys lunch every day, so how many lunches are actually served? So if we take out all the students who just buy, I don't know, an apple or a packet of Doritos, just look at the sandwiches, the entrees, how many student lunches are currently being served, and what actually is the capacity of the current kitchen space? I think that would be helpful to just understand the size of the shortfall that we have at the moment. Is the current kitchen a third of the capacity that we need? Is it half? It's probably more than a fifth, but I think that would be helpful to have those numbers. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for public comment? Okay, I'll close public comment. Mr. Rickard, do you want to address any of the questions?
So with respect to the start times and VOTEC, that's on the list of challenges for later school start times. We've been talking about this issue as a county. Many school districts are looking at this issue. I'm sure that comes as no surprise. We're among several that I know of that are looking at it fairly seriously. So we actually have a meeting scheduled, I think, blanking, but it's in the next couple weeks where we're getting together with several high schools in Somerset County to talk about these issues, because obviously the VOTEC is a significant issue in terms of lining up half-day VOTEC or full-day VOTEC to match up with the schedule at the VOTEC. And the VOTEC serves obviously all the secondary schools in the county, so if it were possible to adjust start times and also align, that's a conversation that we need to have. So that is a fair challenge that we are aware of and that we are looking at. I talk to that superintendent pretty regularly about it. As far as a strand on coaching, we can take a look at that as to where that might fit in. It isn't necessarily that we didn't plan to tackle some of those issues that came up in the strategic plan. We just haven't planned any meetings to date specifically for that. As far as option 2, There are no plans to get rid of option 2. I can tell you that lots of people would love to change the scope of option 2 just because of the nightmarish logistics associated with trying to pull it off on an annual basis and how it throws so many things into imbalance. But certainly we appreciate the feedback we've gotten with respect to the positives, if you will, for option 2, but there are a lot of negatives that go along with it just from the perspective of trying to make it actually work on an annual basis. So, you know, we're trying to fix some of those things behind the scenes if we can, but the volume and scope of it it's pretty overwhelming in what it does to the rest of the schedule at the school. But there are no plans to axe anything in the near future. As far as the numbers go, I know we looked at the numbers on the cafeteria. I don't remember them off the top of my head. And Rod, if you don't either, that's fine. We could talk about it after we have the next finance committee meeting. If you remember something that you want to share, otherwise we can wait until after the next finance committee meeting.
I think there's, first of all, a distinction that needs to be made in terms of when we think about enrollment and the number of students that come to the cafeteria. And you've touched on it a little bit, because some students come down and then they only purchase a beverage.
Right.
And other students come down and they may take something that's already pre-made, or it may be it's like kind of a snack item that they have there, a bag of chips. So when you talk about production in the cafeteria, generally, the way most food service companies and most schools think about it, they're thinking about a total lunch being prepared, or an item or items that can be prepared basically while you wait. And so that's max capacity in terms of the most amount of labor and time that it takes to produce that. So you have to keep in mind that that's normally what they will give you as a number of production capacity for a cafeteria, but not necessarily what it actually takes to address the food needs of your students on a daily basis. I don't know if I'm making myself clear on that, but I'm trying to kind of make that distinction. When we had Aramark and we had our outside food service consultant from Evocate look at this quite some time ago, when we got into the whole, what do we need to build if we're going to build an addition type of thing. My recollection, Nick, is that they came up finally with a number that was somewhere in the 700 plus range in terms of meals that the existing cafeteria could produce. And we were putting that in the context of what is not a finite science, but a survey that was one of the multiple significant surveys that had been done, was it 4 years ago or 5 years ago, that came up with an estimate that out of the then existing enrollment, which was 1,800 plus as it is now, but closer to 1,900, that maybe 1,200 students a day were actually on average using the cafeteria for some sort of food service purchase. And you might think, well, that's a big delta, but you have to consider the fact that while we have relatively, and actually for a statewide average, we have a very high average daily attendance. We're probably somewhere in the 96 to 97% rate, which means 3 to 4% of our students aren't even here every day. Then you have to take into consideration there is some group of students, and it's hard to quantify, but it's significant. It could be 100, it could be 80, that on average don't use the cafeteria at all. And then there are additional students that are taking a lab or doing something with a club or something during those hours. And that's how you get down to what the survey of the actual student population with the feedback we got. And I think it was an extrapolation, was it, Nick, from there? Do you remember the survey I'm talking about?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, and it looks like, we had 1,000 students a few years ago respond to the question about how they use the cafeteria. So it wasn't every student that responded at the time, but it was specific to high school kids, and about 1/5 of the kids that responded to the survey said that they bring their lunch to school every day and that they buy school food rarely or never. All the other kids responded in some other fashion, that they use the cafeteria for some purposes, whether it's supplemental purchases, occasional purchases, about half of the days, and others said, about 40% of the kids said that they buy lunch from the school cafeteria every day. So, you know, again, this goes back a few years. It was better than half the students that responded. You know, it's interesting because you think about the purchasing habits of the kids and what the cafeteria offers. This is with respect to what the cafeteria was offering at the time, and what we've heard from the kids is they're looking for other offerings. So, you know, I think one of the things that we've talked about at length is you know, what we're able to offer the students and how many kids are buying it based on what we offer. And it'd be interesting if we create a different environment where we can create other items for the students that they might be more interested in buying if their answers change on this after something like that's in play. But, you know, this is what it was a few years ago. So, you know, roughly 1/5 of the kids said they weren't really buying anything in the cafeteria. So, you know, we're at 1,800 kids, 1/5 of that, you know, a few hundred students aren't really using the cafeteria at all.
Can you use the My School Bucks? Would that tell you how many kids?
You can't get that data out of it because it doesn't aggregate it in a way that allows, and it really, in the end, what it comes down to, part of it is, you know, is looking at what your production capacity is, which we did do, and actually just surveying the students. And I think, to your point, Nick, though, if we can get, and we do have, as Tim noted, we have a new food service director as of today, and let's say we did have some improvement in the offerings. A lot of what I recall students wanted were not things that were overly time consumptive for production. We're talking about fresh salads and things like that, and or, you know, stations that have, you know, made to order, but maybe they're, you know, Chinese or paninis or things like that. They're going to be quick. So, you know, that is going to take, you know, that would increase your production number. But when I say 700, that's looking at producing a full pre-prepped, full school lunch, so to speak, which is, you know, all the components therein. That takes more time than some of things. 700. No, they thought they could do 700 for a lunch. Yeah.
Right. If you had a unit.
Right.
Anyone have anything for board forum?
I have a question. I'm hesitant to ask now. We heard some information from the finance report. We listened to Dr. Grip. We know we have a 60-day window to address these bids or request an extension. Are we going to wait till next time, or how are we going to do this?
Well, I think at finance, from what I understand, they're going to have the comparative numbers, so not just the cost of the construction where we got bids on it, which we know that cost, or the construction if we renovated the existing cafeteria, but also factoring in the staffing costs of one cafeteria versus two and things like that. So then we'll have the details with the numbers. And I think they were still looking some more into the classroom usage and stuff, in more detail. Right. So if we have the finance meeting, is it next week? Yeah, so that's soon. And then we have a meeting on the 16th.
Okay, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Well, we also have meetings in January.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we'll certainly have a big discussion in December after we have the finance meeting and we have more details. And then we'll see whether it's a easier decision or a harder decision based on those numbers. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, we're up to adjournment. Would someone like to make a motion? Tim and Jen Korn.